Good evening, you're watching Just the News. I'm Amita Balachandra. We start off with massive protests that are taking place due to the Agnipath scheme. It's been 3 days now since these protests have taken place in Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Jammu, Haryana, Rajasthan, among other parts of the country as well. Two coaches of a passenger train were set on fire by a mob in Bihar and UP's Balya on Friday. Bihar Deputy Chief Minister Renu Devi's house in Betai district was attacked today as well. Now, protesters also attacked the residence of Bihar BJP chief Sanjay Jaiswal, injuring one policeman in the incident. Now, in Uttar Pradesh, a mob entered a railway station in Balya this morning and set a train coach on fire and also damaged railway station property before the police used force to disperse them. Now, anticipating violence in the state, Haryana government has suspended internet services in Faridabad district's Ballabgarh, and this is what happened after Palwal, whereas prohibitory orders under section 144 restricting gathering of more than 4 persons has been imposed in Gurugram. In the meantime, in Telangana, one person was killed and 15 others were critically injured after the police opened fire to control an angry mob at Secunderabad railway station. Now, hundreds of candidates aspiring for army recruitment tests vandalized the main railway station in the Telangana city. In fact, across the country in several parts, train coaches have been set on fire, and rail and road has also services have also been disrupted. Now, police constables were also injured in the stone pelting, and according to a report by PTI, Telangana police resorted to aerial firing to disperse the angry crowd at the railway station in Secunderabad as protests escalated into large-scale violence as well. In the meantime, at least 200 trains have been affected due to the protests that are taking place in the country against this scheme. Now, trains coaches were set on fire and railroad property, like I mentioned, was vandalized in UP, Bihar, among other states as well. Meanwhile, Union Railways Minister has appealed to the youth to not indulge in violent protests and refrain from damaging railways property. Now, while all of this is happening, there's one compromise that the government has made only for this year, and that is a 1-year waiver that the centre is calling. The centre has now increased the upper age limit for recruitment in the armed forces under the Agnipath scheme for 23 years instead of 21 years, and this is only for this year, considering the last 2 years recruitment has not taken place. Now, a statement by the government has said, and I quote, "Cognizant of the fact that it has not been possible to undertake the recruitment during the last 2 years, the government has decided that a one-time waiver shall be granted for the proposed recruitment cycle for 2022, end quote. Now, aspirants have been demanding the rollback of the policy, questioning long-term prospects of the job. They're also wanting benefits. They ask why only 4 years. So, there are several demands that have been made by the protesters, and protests continue. Moving on from this story now to northeast floods, Tripura government has decided to introduce buses to transport passengers via Bangladesh to other parts of India. Now, this was after National Highway 6 in Meghalaya's Lumsong police station jurisdiction washed away because of the landslides. Now, the NH6 connects southern Assam, Mizoram, Tripura, and parts of Manipur to the rest of the country. In the meantime, the toll of Assam floods has now risen to 46. According to Assam State Disaster Management Authority, over 11 lakh people have been impacted due to the rain and floods in 25 districts of the state. Moving on to an update on the profit row right now, the US has condemned the comments made by two former BJP leaders about Prophet Muhammad. Now, State Department spokesperson Ned Price has said during a press conference, and I quote, "We condemn the offensive comments made by two BJP officials. We were glad to see that the party publicly condemned these comments," end quote. Earlier, at least 15 countries, majority of them were Gulf countries, who had condemned the remarks and also asked for an apology from India. Moving on from this story now, content on the 2002 Gujarat riots, the Mughal rule in India, and the nationwide emergency imposed in 1975 are among the texts dropped by the National Council of Educational Research and Training, or the NCERT, from its textbooks. Now, in a note released on Thursday, the NCERT has said that the revision was part of, and I quote, rationalization of contents in textbooks, end quote. Now, changes have been made to textbooks for classes 6 to 12. Now, an entire chapter titled Kings and Chronicles, the Mughal Courts, 16th to 17th centuries, has also been dropped from the class 12 history syllabus. Other content removed from the class 12 syllabus include excerpts on the Cold War and the US hegemony in world politics from class 11 history textbook, a chapter titled Central Islamic Lands and another named the Industrial Revolution have also been dropped. Moving on now, Dera Chand Sauda chief Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh was released on a month-long parole from Rohtak's Sunaria jail in Haryana this morning. Singh and 4 others are serving life imprisonment for the murder of a former manager of the sect. Now, he was sentenced by a special CBI court in Haryana's Panchkula town in October. The Dera Sacha Sauda chief is also serving a 20-year term in prison for raping 2 of his followers. On to business news right now. Funds deposited by Indian nationals and firms in Swiss banks rose to a 14-year high of 3.83 billion Swiss francs, which is over 30,500 crore rupees in 2021. Last year, a total of over 20,700 crore rupees were reported in the Indian accounts, an increase of 183% from 6,625 crore rupees in 2019. Now, the data, however, is a collection of official figures reported by the central bank by various individual banks in the country. However, according to a report by PTI, it does not account for the alleged black money held by Indians in Switzerland. On to environment news right now. According to a UN report, nearly 5 million people in India were internally displaced due to climate change and disasters in 2021. Now, from a global perspective, over 100 million people were forced to flee their homes last year due to the violence, human rights abuses, food insecurity, the climate crisis, war in Ukraine, and other emergencies from Africa to Afghanistan. Now, India stands third for largest displacements due to disasters in 2021 at 4.9 million. Moving on to news from across the globe right now, starting off with Ukraine crisis. The European Commission has now recommended that Ukraine be designated a candidate for membership of the European Union, bringing its hopes of joining a step closer. Now, this obviously has made Ukraine happy because Ukrainian president has said that his country has never been closer to the European Union than it is now, and that was its demand. In his video address, Zelensky has termed it a truly historic day and a step forward. He added, and I quote, "Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow will also be a lot of news for Ukraine, and I believe that it will be positive," end quote. There's obviously a reaction that's coming from Russia, where Russian Foreign Ministry has now accused Brussels of manipulating Ukraine after the recommendation. Now, what happens now? The recommendation on Friday from the EU's executive arm will now be discussed by leaders of the 27-nation bloc during a summit next week in Brussels. Launching accession talks requires unanimous approval from all member countries. And one piece of good news before we wrap things up here on this bulletin: US President Joe Biden has nominated Indian American security expert Radha Iyengar Plumb for the post of Deputy Under Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. Now, this is the latest Indian American to be named for a key position. She is currently serving as the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Defense Secretary. Prior to her appointment as Chief of Staff, Plumb was a Director of Research and Insights for Trust and Safety at Google. That brings us to the end of this bulletin. Thank you so much for watching. Do give us feedback on what improvement you would like for us to make on Just the News. And also, we're going to be putting up a video, an explainer on the Agnipath scheme, what the scheme is about, why are people protesting across the country, and why they're really not satisfied with the government's response so far. That's coming up on our YouTube page. Do share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Good night.